This meeting is now being recorded.
Okay. So welcome to the Assistive Technology webinar. This is a follow-up to the EI State meeting. This is Laura Merrill. I'm here with Beth Cole. We'll be walking through the information that you referenced at the state meeting as wanting more information about. Most of the questions you had were just about how do we use the resource materials? Is there a way that we'll know how to document assistive technology on ISSPs? So we're going to walk through that today, as well as leave time for questions and answers. Now, because the PowerPoint we'll be using in this webinar is really interactive and has a lot of links on it, we are going to screen share so that you can see what that looks like when we actually go to the link. So I'm going to start screen sharing right now. Okay, so everybody should be seeing the PowerPoint on their screen. And Beth is going to monitor the chat because when I do that, I can't see the chat. So if you have any questions or if you're not seeing it, just please let Beth know in the chat. Okay, here we go. So what are we doing today in this webinar? The first thing we're going to do is to really look at the AT resources that are already available to you. We're going to use a case study to learn how to document AT on the IFSP. We're going to discuss the role of the AT consultants. We're going to delve a little bit into what the funding options for AT are, and then at the end we will take questions from you, stakeholders, and you can provide us any feedback about what you would like to have more information about assistive technology, what would be helpful to you, and what can we incorporate moving forward into our assistive technology resource materials.
So the first thing we're going to do is orient you to the Tech for Tykes website. You see the link down on the bottom, and we're going to go to that link. And then we're going to go to some of the different areas that are on the Tech for Tykes website. Laura's clicking on the resources right now, and you'll see the IFSP Quick Guide, AT funding sources, and then different other web links and supports.
And these are here as well.
And they're right there as well. In addition, in the middle, under the resources, there's the frequently asked questions, handouts, flyers, tips and implementation ideas, and that has some great suggestions.
Maybe clicking on that.
Yeah, clicking on that one to show you what that looks like. So it kind of goes through different scenarios and possible solutions to different issues around everyday routines, such as mealtime, bath time, I think playtime, car. And so this is a great resource primarily for providers to go to and get ideas of how they can use assistive technology to help with certain issues during certain situations.
And the great thing about these scenarios is they're really low-tech AT. So we're going to be talking about what's low-tech and high-tech AT. High-tech AT is really communication devices, wheelchairs, walkers, that kind of thing, seating inserts. Low-tech is things that you can just buy and modifications you can make with things that are readily available. I also wanted to show them real quick. We're going to go back. How about the TA, please? Which one do you want?
Guide for families.
Okay, the guide for families.
This is a really great guide to help, especially service coordinators, but also providers, talk about what is assistive technology in early intervention. And like Laura was saying, it really does go through what is low tech, what is high tech, what is the definition of assistive technology. And so this is really good to help families understand what we mean when we talk about assistive technology. Because families typically think of assistive technology as the bigger ticket items. And so this really helps families understand that it's more than that.
Yeah, what we really want you to see all these resources that were developed previously, because we know that you may not know where to find all of these. Oops, well, that's not where I wanted to go.
Do the resources.
There we go. The other one I wanted to show you, because you're going to actually be seeing this referenced when we start looking at the interactive guide for how things are documented on the IFSP, is this TA brief.
And again, this is a document that kind of explains a little bit more in detail what we mean by assistive technology, who accesses assistive technology, how the training that is required, the loan bank and who can access the loan bank. It really kind of goes through all of those details.
Yeah, and so this is a really comprehensive document. I'm just going to scroll down so you can see what kind of information is provided in here, what the legal definition of AT in early intervention is, some examples of low and high-tech AT, legal rights and responsibilities, how you document it on the IFSP. So all of this is contained within this technical assistance brief. We're also going to, Beth's going to delve on into a little more deeply later on in the webinar how you can identify funding sources and resources for actual AT devices. Okay? Anything else you want to say there, Beth?
So some of the other resources that you see on the left in that little blue and pinkish bubble, we're going to be clicking on that. We're going to go to the IFSP Quick Guide, and then we're also going to take you to the AT funding sources as we move through this webinar. But we really encourage you to go to this website, review the resources, read through the FAQs, read through the handouts, because it's a lot of really good information that's already out there and has been developed.
Oops. Hold on here. What's it doing? There we go. Okay, are there any questions in the chat before we move on?
Okay, there is one. A lot of current confusion, I'm going to have to make the chat bigger just a sec, Mickey, is around the fact that AT Partners has completed provider service coordinator training, but several pieces of that information does not match what has been given as guidance to the CCBs from EI Colorado. Will this webinar address that too? I'm not sure exactly which confusing information, but what we will do is go through the information that was developed for the training for the assistive technology consultants, our expectations for the consultants, and our expectations for the CCBs with regard to the consultants. So, Mickey, if you have some specific examples of where there's a disconnect between what you are hearing from through the assistive technology partners and what you're hearing from us, then we are happy to address those discrepancies.
Yeah, so we will look at some of that on this webinar, but if there are things we're missing, please let us know. Specifically, you can email Beth or I. We'll try and open it up more broadly for discussion as well at the end of the webinar. Is there anything else, Beth?
Nope. Mickey was just asking if she should say it or chat it. And at this point, because we have so many people on the webinar, we want folks to actually send in their questions and comments via chat.
Yeah, I'm just concerned that we'll get a lot of feedback because we have upwards of 40 people on this. Okay, so now the next thing we want to do is we actually want to use a case study, and using that case study, walk through what we think about the use of assistive technology for this little girl, Anita Manning, in early intervention. Now, you're going to need this case study to refer to when I pull up the interactive quick guide. But let's go ahead, if you would just go ahead and read through this real quickly, and then you should be able to click on this document link, and it should open in another window for you.
Hopefully.
You know what? You might have to click on it in the...
No.
Okay, I'm going to try and do something real quickly with this. I'm going to pull it up on the other.
And put it in the chat.
Mm-hmm. Let's see if we can you copy and paste that in the chat? Okay, I'm going to go out of screen share and get to that so that we can look at that. Okay, I'm going to get to that link for you to look at. Okay, try clicking on that link and see if it'll work for you now.
Yep, now it'll work.
Okay, sorry, I didn't realize it doesn't work in screen share. So I'm going to give everybody a minute to click on that link so you have it in a separate window. Okay. Now, I'm going to show you the next one without screen sharing for a minute too, because this is the link directly to the IFSP Quick Guide. So if you want to pull both those windows up, you can. This also will work if you click on this link from the Global Meet webinar. Okay? So if you want to do that, go ahead and click on those two things. You'll definitely need the case study. And then I'm going to go back to screen sharing so we can walk through the online guide together. So I'll give you just a couple minutes to make sure everyone's had time to do that. Okay, I'm going to go back to sharing my screen again. And now I'm at the wrong slide. So let's go back. Okay. All right, so we looked at Anita. So Anita is having her IFSP review. Currently, she's participating in breakfast time by choosing what she wants to eat. And the other priority was for her to be able to move from playtime with Dad to dinner time by signing eat and going to wash her hands at the kitchen sink. So actually looking at that transition. So when the team convened to review Anita's IFSP outcome, you learn what strategies that the SLP has supported the family in using some signs, teaching Anita to use those signs, making picture cards, and developing a visual schedule to help Anita transition. So all of those strategies have been working for Anita. They're going to continue to use them, but there's a new concern. And that concern is that Anita has started to attend childcare 2 days a week, and she is having difficulty communicating with the other children that are there. So the family's priority is that she be able to really play and interact with the children at childcare. They're thinking that it might be time to look at a more advanced communication system for Anita that she can use both at childcare and at home. They don't know anything about it, how to choose it, or how to use it correctly, and the current provider isn't comfortable with determining that need for Anita and a communication device. And she has Medicaid as a funding source. So I want to look at the interactive guide here and just walk through it. If you have questions as we move through this, I'm going to be asking you questions, and you may also have questions for us. But I want you to actually, we're going to walk through this case study with Anita using the case study, using the quick guide. So if you look at the quick guide here, you'll see that there's little arrows down in the right-hand corner. This allows you to progress through the quick guide, slide by slide. There's also a key down here where you can jump to any part of the quick guide without navigating all the way through it. So let's just look at this really quickly. So here's the purpose of the guide. We're thinking about what the assistive technology the child is going to need or is currently using, why it's important, who's evaluating and selecting the AT, and when and where the child is using the AT, and how it's going to improve the child's functional capabilities as related to an IFSP outcome, and then lastly, how the AT is being funded. So let's walk through this. Once again, it's referring here to the EI Colorado Technical Assistance Brief because this guide just won't answer every single question that you have. It's going to provide clarification, but those resources that Beth just showed you, it's going to provide more detailed information and answer other questions you may have. Do we have questions in the chat yet, Beth?
No, I just wanted to get a link to the...
Oh, okay, great. All right. So this is decision tree. All of you are familiar with decision trees. And the very first slide is going to show you the whole decision tree. It's going to be hard to see. You can progress step by step through the guide, which is what we're going to do now, or you can skip to the sections you want using the key down in the bottom right-hand corner. So let's look at this. So you'll have arrow buttons in the lower right-hand corner. You can go back and forth through the entire guide, one slide at a time, but this also has interactive yes and no buttons. There's also buttons that have an eye on them. That's going to give you more information about the topic. And then the toggle button switches between slide view and an outline view of the guide. Okay? The jump list is what they're talking about down here. You can jump around any way you want. But for the purposes of really thinking about, does this child need an AT device? Do they need AT services? And how are we going to document that on the IFSP? It's great to just use the yes/no buttons to move your way through the guide. So let's look at Anita. So here's some key. The diamond icon indicates that at this step of the process you need to make a decision, and then the documentation icon indicates the need for specific information. So here's what the main decision tree looks like. Now this, if you pulled it up in a separate window, you can make it bigger. It's hard to see here. Let me see if I can make it a little bigger. So this is the whole decision tree that we're going to be navigating through. And you'll see that depending on how you answer a question, determines where you're going to go within the decision tree. Let me get back here. Okay. So the first thing you're going to want to do is understand the difference between AT services and devices. So here's your information tab. So here's the definition of AT services. It's to help assist the infant or toddler with a disability, the family, caregivers, or other service providers in the selection, acquisition, and use of AT. So let's go back and think about the case study of Anita. Do you think she's going to need assistive technology services? What do you think? Answer in the chat.
Yes.
Yes. And so the reason she's going to need assistive technology services is because there's this new concern. We're going to explore the use of a communication device. And so we need to know what the communication device is going to be used for. We need to explore different types of devices to find the best fit for Anita and her family. So she is definitely going to need AT services. Now let's look at AT devices. An AT device is an item or piece of equipment that is used to increase, maintain, or improve the functional capabilities of an infant or toddler with a disability in his or her usual environment. So, does Anita need an AT device? Please answer in the chat.
Yes.
Okay, so one of the things we talked about with Anita is a communication device. So at this point in the IFSP process, what we're looking at is exploring what device is needed. So at this point on Anita's IFSP, on this periodic review, we're not going to have a device documented. What we're going to have documented are the services that help us determine what that device will be. And we're going to walk through and see how this looks like, what this looks like. And then the device itself will probably be once that determination has been made, once devices have been trialed, once an assistive technology consultant or a provider with expertise in assistive technology has worked through all of that with Anita and her family. So let's look at it with that in mind. Are there questions about that before I move on?
No questions.
Put your questions in the chat at any time. So step one, is an AT evaluation needed? So read through this. What's the answer for Anita? Yes or no?
Don't all answer at once. I'm getting a yes.
Okay. I'm going to try and unmute you just to see what it would be like. No, I'd have to stop screen sharing to do that.
No, I can Oh, yeah, you would have to.
Okay, I'm sorry. We're going to have to just keep going with the chat. Okay, yes. So we need an evaluation because of all those reasons we talked about on the last slide. We don't know what kind of communication device is needed for Anita. We don't even really know how they're thinking about using it. We know that their concern is that Anita communicate more with her peers during child care, but we don't have a whole lot of information about what that's going to look like. We also know that the current provider doesn't feel she has the knowledge or expertise to support Anita and her family in this determination. So yes, indeed, we need an evaluation. So then where do we document an AT evaluation? We're going to document the need for the evaluation in the strategy section of the plan of action. So we would have an outcome for Anita that was about her being able to communicate more effectively with the peers at child care, which is what they said their priority was. So part of how we're going to meet that outcome is to have an AT evaluation. So we're actually going to note that in the strategy section. And then we're also going to note that as an AT service on the IFSP agreement page. And we're going to get more information about that here.
Okay, we have a question from Colorado Blue Sky.
Okay.
Is it okay to put both AT and AY? I'm not sure what AY is. So, Melinda,
can you tell us what AY
is? Oh, it's an AT device?
Yes, it is. But you should never have an AT device on it. So you can have an IFSP that has both AT service and AT device, but you should never have a device on there until after you've had a service in there to do the evaluation. So you need to make sure that you have the correct device before you move on. Now, if the device is already being used by the child, so if Anita had already had a communication device, she may not need another formal AT evaluation. And so in that case, if the AT evaluation has already been conducted, you could go straight to documenting what that device is. But if you have not determined what that device is, then you're going to need an AT eval, and that's true in Anita's case.
Right. So, Melinda, does that answer your question about a low-tech item? Especially something that's already being used. That, yes, it can be documented at the same time as an AT evaluation.
So if this was something that, for instance, the picture cards that the speech therapist is already using for Anita, that's an example of a low-tech AT adaptation. In that case, if you had someone in there that was solely devoted to that, you could have AT as a service and you wouldn't need evaluation. You generally do not need an evaluation for a low-tech device. But in Anita's case, we're looking at a high-tech communication device. Questions? Okay. So the next step is to document it on the IFSP. So let's look at how we're going to document AT services. First, is AT as a service necessary? Well, we already answered that, yes, because we need it for the evaluation. So that would be considered AT service, so we're going to say yes. Then we're going to document how the AT is used on the present levels of development pages, if you're still using those, or in the family assessment or the strengths and needs pages if you're using the new global outcomes form. So how is Anita using AT now? We already know that. That's the picture cards and how that's being used. What we need to do next is we want to evaluate communication devices that may support Anita in better communicating with her peers at daycare. So that's actually going to be in the strategies on the plan of action page.
No questions so far.
No questions? Okay. So here's the first step that we do. We document AT as a service. We document, we're going to document at home, usually here for a location. We're going to be talking about how the service will be provided. It's going to be individual. There's some mistakes on here I see that aren't up to date with the new form. So we updated it recently, but we didn't catch everything. The global outcomes came into place. So we'll make sure that that's in there. But you need to document it as individual. Okay. The frequency and intensity. So for instance, if in Anita's case, we're going to have to bring in a new provider. And that provider is going to need to be someone that has experience with determining how communication devices can be used to support infants and toddlers, conducting functional AT evals, and making some recommendations for communication devices for Anita and her family. So we are going to need to think about what that might look like. How often is that going to be in play? How long those sessions are going to be like? What are we going to do? Are we going to observe Anita at child care? Will we be observing Anita in the home? Now, here's one tricky thing about the case study of Anita. So we hopefully knew before the review that this was a new concern of the family. If we knew this information before the review, and we also knew that the speech-language pathologist currently working with Anita did not feel she had the expertise to work with them around identification and use of a communication device, then what we could have done and would have saved us trouble in the long run is have someone with that AT expertise, like an AT consultant, at the review for Anita and her family. If you aren't able to do that, then you're going to have to identify that as a service need, but you may not know the frequency and intensity until you've actually gotten the AT consultant in to meet with the family, and you're probably going to have to review the IFSP again.
Mm-hmm.
Are there questions about that?
No questions.
Okay. So you're filling out that AT service just like any other service on the IFSP. If you're thinking that this is a service that they're going to do some observation, some trialing, that kind of thing, generally that's going to take a while. So that service may take all of 6 months up to the next review. If there is some of that's been already done, it may not take that long, and you may want to document that service for a shorter duration. Both are absolutely fine. So is an AT device necessary at this point for Anita? What are we saying here?
Let's see. Whitney is saying no. Callie's saying yes. Kidron is saying yes. Colorado Blue Sky is not sure. Yasmin is saying yes.
All right.
So we have mixed reactions.
Okay, good. That's great. So at this time, since the functional assistive technology evaluation and the consult from the person with assistive technology expertise has not taken place, right now we're saying no. But I understand why you're saying yes, because we know that this is going to be necessary in the future. But remember, we're just looking at what we're documenting on the IFSP now. So because this is a high-tech assistive technology device, we aren't documenting it on the IFSP until the observation and evaluation from someone with expertise has happened. That's going to include trialing different devices, accessing the AT loan bank, that kind of thing. So for now, for Anita, we're going to say no. But on the next review, where the evaluation has taken place and you've gathered all this additional information, then indeed the answer is going to be yes. So we're just looking at this review right now, so we're going to say no. Are there more questions about that there?
And there's a question from Colorado Blue Sky.
Okay.
Are only AT consultants, those that have been through the training, the only ones allowed to provide an AT service? And actually, on the next part of this webinar, we're going to be talking about the AT consultants, and I can answer that question at that point.
Okay, so we're going to hold your question for best section. Okay. So we're just saying right now the AT device is not essential. It will be in the future. So let's go back and see. Let's just look at the wording here. Does the device serve a vital role in achieving an outcome on the child's IFSP? Once we get the evaluation in place, the answer is going to be yes. So let's look at what the information button here says. So here's a great question. The question is, if the child was not using the device, would the family be able to implement the strategies to accomplish the outcome listed on the IFSP? That's what we need to ask to determine if devices are necessary, okay? And here's some more guidance around that. Are they going to need this device for longer than 3 to 6 months? If it's a temporary low-tech adaptation, you still include it in the strategies, but it wouldn't be considered a device. The device will be purchased specifically for the child, as opposed to using or modifying an item that happens to be easily found in the environment and readily available for any child. So the example that comes to mind for me, because this was a low-tech device we used for my son a lot, is he had difficulty sitting up straight, so we used a lot of rolled-up towels to help position him. That wouldn't be documented as an AT device. We wouldn't be purchasing towels for people to use for that. It's just part of what the provider can do or part of an AT service. The device has to be necessary for the child to make progress on the IFSP. And it can be an over-the-counter purchase that has been customized or modified directly for the child. In this case, the thing that comes most clearly to mind are toys to which switches have been added. Okay, so let's go back. Let me get out of here. So be sure to explore these information buttons because they can give you more information. So let's say no for now. We're going to move on. So at this point, there are no further documentation needs. So we've documented the AT service, and we're done. So let's go back and let's say this is the next review for Anita. And we've gotten someone with AT expertise in there. They've trialed devices. They've determined the device that is necessary for Anita to make progress towards the outcome on her IFSP. So in that case, we're going to answer yes. So for a new device, this is what you do. You document acquired, purchased, or trialed. You don't necessarily, you're documenting those devices in the strategy section. And what that means for trial devices, it's really great if we know, gosh, we've tried these different kinds of communication devices with Anita. Now, sometimes you may not know enough about that to put them in the strategy section, and this may be just something that has been in the provider notes, and that's okay too. We just want to know what's been happening with Anita to help determine the correct device for her. And the use of the device should be referenced directly in an outcome. So for Anita, her priority is that she's going to be able to communicate with her peers at child care. And so an outcome might be that Anita will use her communication device and what she's going to do with that, okay? So it's pretty specific. It's right in the outcome. You should never have a device on the plan without it being specifically referenced in the outcome. And if we know exactly what the device is, that's the specificity should be in there as well. So it could be under the strategies you're saying, this is the device that we've decided on as appropriate for Anita. All of that information is going to be right in the outcome. Then you're going to document the device within the IFSP agreement page. Now, a question comes up a lot as to whether or not devices can be documented before we know exactly which device it is, and the answer to that is no. If you're just in the trialing process, you're not going to document it on the IFSP, and you can see it's not until the final thing has been done. So that's it. That is the use of the IFSP Interactive Quick Guide. So try that out with a couple kids that you're working on and working with and see how that works. Okay? We're going to move on, and Beth is going to hold on. And Beth's going to go through what's happening with the AT consultants.
So, actually, can you get back into...
You want me to get out of screen share?
I need you to get back into the
flip side?
The Tech for Tykes.
Oh, sure. Let me get there.
Anyway, we're going to show you where it's outlined on the Tech for Tykes website for the AT consultants. It's under the education and training. And it says AT consultant trainings. And in order for someone to be considered an AT consultant, I think it's coming up, right?
Yeah, it's right
Yeah.
there.
They have to go through the, at the bottom it says EI consultant training videos. They have to do those videos. And within those videos is a link to additional modules that they have to go through. And then they also have to go through a training on how to use the loan bank.
Right here. Yeah, and it's important that they work through these modules in order, because within the modules themselves are instructions for the next steps, like how you access the Moodle modules. You have to contact Brian at AT Partners to get the sign-in link. So it really is important that you go through these 5 training videos in order.
One thing to keep in mind is when providers go to sign up for the Moodle modules to do the training, it says that to do all of the modules is $99. For early intervention providers, that is not true, but they have to get a specific code in order to be able to access those trainings without having to pay.
So you need to be sure and let them know you are an active early intervention provider.
Right. So the providers have several steps before they can be considered an AT consultant. And so that's part of what they have to go through. And then they can also participate in quarterly community of practice calls in order to collaborate with other providers statewide. So moving on to the expectations, we really expect that every CCB have at least one AT consultant. And for the smaller CCBs, it can be a consultant that's shared between 2 or even 3 CCBs. But it's important to have somebody who has access to the loan bank in order to be able to figure out what the most appropriate device is going to be. And we want to remind CCBs that an evaluation for an AT device has to happen. So the AT service to evaluate AT devices has to happen before an AT device can be added to the IFSP. Now, when we're talking about this, we're talking about bigger devices that are expected to move with the child for longer periods of time. It's important to realize that the AT consultants, even though they have those titles, may not have the knowledge about a particular item that's being investigated, but one thing that they do have is connection to the AT partners and the other resources that are available through AT partners to help figure out which devices should be trialed. And this is a collaboration between the ongoing provider and the AT consultant if they're separate individuals. They're not necessarily going to be separate individuals. Sometimes the provider is the AT consultant. Only the AT consultants are allowed to access the loan bank, and part of that is because AT Partners has, I would say, limited resources in order to manage the number of requests and in order to keep track of the information. And so they want to make sure it's funneled to those people who have been through the training on how to handle the loan bank. But taking items from the loan bank in order to trial them with a family is a timely process because they have to contact AT Partners, figure out which item or items that they want to trial. Then they have to work with AT Partners to have those items sent. Typically through the interlibrary loan is how they are sent across the state. And then the provider has to go to the library, pick up the device. And so we strongly encourage CCBs to pay a higher rate to the AT consultants when they're acting as an AT consultant because of all of this additional work that is part of accessing the loan bank. So in terms of finding a consultant, right now, the link on the Tech for Tykes website for the AT consultants actually just takes the individual back to the CCB. And so it's really important for you to communicate with your providers to find out who is trained as an AT consultant and make sure that you keep an up-to-date list. And the reason that the AT Partners is doing it this way is the list we got back, I think it was only 4 months ago, is already out of date. Mm-hmm. And so because who is qualified as an AT consultant changes so frequently, it's best if the CCBs manage the people for their areas.
Are there any questions?
Are there questions? Because I'm believing that this is probably where the most questions, and let's see. So here's questions from Mickey, and I'm going to have to try and make it bigger here. So I can read it. Okay, here's an example. Providers indicating that assistive technology partners told them that CCB should be paying them more. That is accurate, like I just said, because of the individual steps that they have to take in order to access the loan bank, connect with the AT partners. We do recommend that you pay those individuals more when they're acting as an AT consultant. Providers feeling that they can't support AT if it's listed in the strategies and not listed on the IFSP as a service. Can we talk about that?
Feeling that they can't support it, is that what it says?
Yeah.
Yeah. They're providers that are highly qualified providers within their respective disciplines all have some knowledge of AT, that they are qualified to provide within their respective disciplines. That doesn't necessarily always have to be an AT service. I encourage you to look more at the documentation because here's what the difference is. If a provider is spending a large amount of their time around making low-tech adaptations, that kind of thing, you may want to note that as an AT service, that a high amount of their time is being devoted to AT. However, providers certainly can support families in the use of low-tech adaptations within their scope of practice, and it doesn't necessarily have to be documented as AT. That's just something providers do.
And that goes back to Melinda's earlier question about are AT consultants the only ones allowed to provide an AT service? No, they are not, but like Laura said, a provider would have to be spending a significant portion of their time working on AT adaptations in order for it to be listed on the IFSP as an AT service, which goes to Mickey's third question or comment about providers are being adamant that AT needs to be provided in addition to their service as extra visits rather than in conjunction with or in place of their current service or visits. And again, it goes back to the amount of time that is being spent on assistive technology versus what the original outcomes for that provider were or are. And if it's getting to be more time that is required for the assistive technology, then it does need to be added as a service, and the provider needs to have additional visits to work specifically on AT services.
I think, like, the thing that makes this difficult is that, like anything, it's very individualized. So we should see this reflected in the strategies for the IFSP outcomes. If it's really looking like, gosh, all the strategies are related to assistive technology or low-tech assistive technology, then maybe they do need extra visits. If they're embedded within the things that that provider is already going to do, they may not, and it can't be a black and white answer. You know, assistive technology consultants can't say we always need an extra service day. That has to be, we have to know what for. So it really is individualized, but it is allowable, and it's going to be based on the individual needs of the child and family and the strategies that are documented on the plan of action page. It is important to think about the fact that we wouldn't expect to see a separate instance of service as an AT service if we don't see what's happening related to AT clearly documented within the strategies for an outcome.
Okay, so Mickey says, I agree that there are instances where it would need to be in addition, but we review everything on a case-by-case basis. I agree. And some of the providers have been black and white about how they are thinking with regards to it as a service, frequency, et cetera. And this is just working with the providers. If you're having issues, have them contact me or Laura, and we can walk them through the process, because it's really obvious that nothing is black and white in early intervention. And so when providers are saying it has to be this way or that way, that's when you have to say, well, let's really look at what's happening and make a determination of whether or not it needs to be added.
And we plan on circling back to AT partners to give them information that we've gathered from you here today and follow up on some of this stuff. Also, if you have exact examples of where this is happening, and you want Beth or I to take a look at the IFSPs to see, gosh, how individualized is this? Does it support AT as a service? We're happy to do that as well.
So Vicki asked, can AT partners add the case-by-case portion into their webinars? We can definitely work with them on that.
move on to funding?
Well, there are other questions that Mickey has. A lot of it is providers promoting AT being listed automatically as a service even before devices have been trialed. And again, it goes back to the service has to be listed before
part of the service is trialing the device.
Yeah, is trialing the device. And so I would say yes, it does need to be listed as a service before the device can be added to the IFSP. So when to put it on as a consult evaluation and how many visits should that be versus an ongoing service? I think a lot of that depends on what it is. For instance, if the provider is helping the family develop a PEC system, that could theoretically be an ongoing service because the provider is spending a portion of every session working with the family on developing the PECs. For something that is, they trial, they come up with a device, and that's the walker that the child is using, that's probably not an ongoing service. And so again, it's not black and white.
There really are no black and white answers to this. The best thing is you have to look at the individuality, which I know you guys know, and it seems like perhaps we need to circle back with the AT consultants to reinforce that and with AT partners, and we'll do that.
Yeah, we will definitely do that. So this is being recorded.
Yeah.
Okay. Vicki has some more.
Oh, sorry. We have 3 minutes.
Look, Colorado Blue Sky. Weighted best, sometimes providers may be trying to help a child calm themselves. There isn't any one answer that fits all of these cases. So Melinda, okay, we have lots and lots of questions about this. What we will try and do is we will type up these questions. Do you know if the chat is recorded? I'll see if we can get if we can get the questions from the chat, and then we will answer them in an FAQ because we're running out of time.
Yeah, I think the main thing to think about is individualization. And providers sometimes have kind of their go-to AT strategies like weighted vests and that kind of thing. Those strategies should be noted and related to an outcome on the IFSP. So it really is important that, it is individualized to the child and family.
So I think we're going to move on to funding because I know that's another big one. And we were going to show you the funding guide, but considering the time, I'm not sure.
Well,
okay, we'll do this really quick. Here's the link, and it really goes through a bunch of different funding options. And so just click on the Assistive Technology Partners. And in many ways, it's very similar to the quick guide in that it's interactive. And so you put in the device that you're looking for.
There's what it looks like.
There's what it looks like. And it will come back with several different funding options. Obviously, Medicaid will fund some things, and we are working with a group to come up with some guidelines more detailed about funding assistive technology through Medicaid. And so when we get the questions from the chat put into an FAQ, I will also add guidelines around billing Medicaid for medical devices. But in general, Medicaid will pretty much only cover larger devices, but this is part of our conversation that we are having with Medicaid to find out how best to access Medicaid. Insurance, again, it varies for every plan, but I really recommend that people try the online funding guide because they have foundations and grants and other funding sources that may be available to CCBs and families. Keep in mind that if a CCB purchases a large piece of equipment and then the child transitions to preschool, the options are for the family to purchase the equipment from the CCB, for the school to purchase the equipment from the CCB, for the CCB to use other funding sources other than Part C, or if none of those happen, then the equipment stays with the CCB. So we are out of time, but like I said, what we will do, we could stay on for a few minutes if folks want to ask more questions, and then we can go back and maybe answer the questions that are in the chat so that they'll be a part of the recording. And then we'll also try and put all of that into an FAQ, answering the questions as well as adding information specifically about billing Medicaid.
And I'm actually going to go back to the main screen. If people want to stay on for a few minutes, I'm going to go back to the main screen so that I can try and
unmute.
Yeah, unmute people.
So Melinda had a question about items like weighted vests. Sometimes providers may be trying to help calm the child themselves for child care, and the provider tried a backpack with rocks, but the child care provider isn't comfortable with letting one child have that item. In this case, we have been, can we document AT device without a service?
The only time that would happen is if that functional evaluation had taken place somewhere else. So that would be the only instance in which that would happen. So in general, I would say no. And if you go through the interactive quick lot guide, it will tell you you need to have that service to provide the evaluation first.
Right. So again, it goes back to nothing is black and white. It's a judgment call.
Even if they had an evaluation done in a clinic, that would not suffice for early intervention because we would want to know how that device is going to be used in a home and community setting. So even though the device may be known, we still want to know the application part for early intervention. I also got a couple things. One, that our colleagues who are super wonderful are cutting and pasting all the questions into a document so that we can have it. And then just a reminder from our team members that it's really just always looking back at the reason. Is it in the priorities identified by the family and therefore an outcome? Is it included in the strategies, or is it just a strategy? That helps determine if AT as a service is needed.
So Laura has a question about finding out which providers have attended the training. And that's just an email out to all of your providers asking who has gotten trained as an AT consultant. In the training, they are told that they should be contacting the CCB to let you know that they have been trained.
Now, one thing, there is one slight glitch to this, and that is some providers that attended the initial introductory training believe that is the training, and that is not so. So what you can do is reach out to them, and then you can also shoot that back to us, and we can check in, or AT partners, and we can cross-reference that. You also may have an instance in which they were assistive technology specialists earlier and completed some of the training then, so we can, and we have that information as well. So we would just need to kind of cross-reference that information.
And actually, Yasmin had a provider who was an AT consultant previously, and I think really that person just needs to reconnect with the AT partners in order to make sure that she has all of the most current information to make sure that she is up to date on everything.
Because if she was an AT, one of the AT specialists earlier, she did go through the Moodle training, but she did not complete those new 5 recorded webinars. So she should connect with AT partners. And we'll also talk with them about those kinds of instances that will come up, because she is missing some of the new information.
Right. So are there any other questions? Feel free to send us an email if you think of things after we stop.
Okay, there's a question here. Okay, so there's a question from one of you that is a consultant that says, you feel that this is really unclear, the steps for what happens. I'm thinking about you mean after you've completed the training, or to complete the training. So this is from you, Callie. Okay, I'm gonna maybe just email you, because I'd like to know more about that, because you're right, it should not be a mystery. If we need to make a document that walks through that more clearly, then we certainly can do that. So thank you for that information.
Yeah, we can definitely put that together.
Yeah. Anything else?
Okay.
All right, well, thank you very much. This is a loaded topic, I can tell, and we'll be working on some of this follow-up information and meeting with AT partners as well, so we'll keep you updated. Thanks, everyone.
All guests have been unmuted. All guests have been muted. All guests have been unmuted.